She died at 32 on the delivery table while her husband was texting his girlfriend in the hallway. Within 4 days, that woman was sleeping in her bed. Within 2 weeks, she was posting photos of her baby shoes online, calling them her second chance at a family. Everyone thought she had won. Everyone thought the grieving grandmother was too old, too broken, too soft to fight back. They were wrong, because the woman in the grave had already seen this coming. Hidden behind the baby blankets in the nursery closet, sealed, dated, documented, was everything a court would ever need. A flash drive, a forged signature exposed, a stolen inheritance tracked to the penny, and a letter that began with 6 words. Mom, if you are reading this, but here's the part that will shatter you. When the DNA results came back, they didn't just destroy the husband. They revealed a truth so stunning that even the lawyers went silent. A dead woman had outplayed everyone. From the grave. The story will remind you, the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most dangerous and the most powerful. Kind of love is the kind that keeps protecting long after it's gone. If that opening gave you chills, you need to stay because the last letter she left behind will break your heart and rebuild it at the same time. Subscribe and hit the bell. We tell stories that actually matter.
We are losing her. Get the crash cart here now. Dr. Nina Prescott's voice sliced through the delivery room, sharp and steady. But her hands were trembling. She had brought over 2,000 babies into the world during her career. She had never lost a mother, not a single time, and she refused to let tonight be the first. The monitors shrieked in unison. The noise was a piercing, mechanical wail that embeds itself in your memory forever. Nurses became a blur of blue uniforms and gloved hands. One applied pressure to the hemorrhage, while another checked the intravenous drip. A third shouted vital signs into the intercom. Colleen Ashford, at 32 years old and 8 months pregnant with triplets, lay on the table. Her dark hair was drenched in sweat, and her lips had turned a pale, almost bluish color. Her fingers were clutched around a small photograph, the ultrasound picture from her 20-week scan. It showed 3 tiny figures, each one circled with a purple heart she had drawn herself. 3 hearts, 3 babies, 3 reasons she had endured every setback, every night without sleep, and every moment of fear. Her eyelids fluttered open for just a moment. She gazed at Dr. Prescott and tried to form words. Her voice was just a faint sound, barely human. Tell them I wanted them. Every single day, I wanted them. Then her eyes shut for good. The emergency cart clattered in. Dr. Prescott went to work. She performed compressions, used the defibrillator, and injected epinephrine straight into the intravenous line. She fought for 11 minutes. 11 minutes that stretched into an eternity. 11 minutes during which the surgical team delivered 3 babies via an emergency cesarean section. 2 girls and a boy. Margot was first, followed by Bridget, and then Theodore. All 3 were breathing. All 3 were crying out, their small lungs taking in air for the very first time. Their sounds were new, urgent, and beautiful. Their mother was not breathing. Their mother was not crying out. Their mother was gone. Dr. Prescott stepped away from the operating table. She removed her gloves and glanced at the wall clock. 9:47 in the evening. She knew she would never forget that time. Time of death, she announced, her voice breaking on the final word. 9:47 p.m. The room fell quiet. It was not silent. The machines continued to beep, and the babies continued to cry. But the people inside that room became still. It was the kind of stillness that hangs in the air after something final has happened. Out in the corridor, beyond the delivery room, Grant Ashford stood with his back to the wall. He was not anxiously walking back and forth. He was not praying. He was looking at his phone, the screen casting a glow on his face. He was sending a text message. His thumbs moved with speed and purpose, like someone checking tasks off a list. A nurse emerged from the double doors with tears on her face. She had been weeping. She looked over at Grant and called his name. He did not look up. She called his name once more. He raised a single finger, the universal signal for just a minute. She said his name a third time. "Mr. Ashford, you have to come in now." He finally looked up, locked his phone, and put it in his pocket. He followed the nurse through the door. He never asked if something was wrong. He did not run. He walked. The neonatal team had already moved the triplets into 3 separate incubators, 3 tiny forms wrapped in hospital blankets. Margot was in pink, and Bridget was in yellow. Theodore was in blue. They were in stable condition. They were small, but they were fighters, all 3 of them, just like their mother had been. Grant stood beside the incubators and looked at the infants. He then looked at the nurse. "Are all 3 healthy?" he asked. The nurse confirmed they were. "Good," he replied. "That is good." He did not ask about Colleen. Not right away. Not until Dr. Prescott approached him directly. Not until she stood before him and spoke the words. Even then, his response was calm and composed. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He let out a long breath, like a man dealing with a minor business problem, like a man adjusting his plans. "Was it the hemorrhage?" he inquired. Dr. Prescott nodded. "We did everything we could. The placental abruption was just too severe. The bleeding could not be stopped. I am so sorry." Grant nodded once, then again. He ran a hand through his hair. "But the babies are okay," he stated. It was not a question. "The babies are stable." "Okay, okay," he breathed out again. "I have to make a few calls." He turned and walked back into the hall. He took his phone out and made a call. It took him only 3 seconds to find the number. It was not the action of a grief-stricken man fumbling through his contacts, but of a man who had the number ready. "It is me," he said. "She is gone. Come to the hospital, but wait until the morning. I will text you when it is time." After hanging up, he stood in the hallway for a long while. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed. The floor was made of cold tile. The air smelled of disinfectant and was recycled. He put his phone back in his pocket, adjusted his collar, and went back into the neonatal unit. And for the very first time, he looked like a husband in mourning. Dorothy Brennan got there at 11:23 that night. She had driven for 4 hours through a thunderstorm, all the way from her home in Ridgewood. Her daughter's water had broken 6 weeks early. Dorothy had quickly packed a bag and started driving. She had not stopped. Not for food, not even to turn on the radio. It was 4 hours of just silence, rain, and a constant prayer repeating in her head. She walked into the maternity area, expecting to hold her new grandchildren. She was 61 years old with silver hair and capable hands. She had raised 2 children all by herself after her husband passed away. She had held down 2 jobs for 15 years. She had overcome every challenge that life had presented. She was prepared for this. She was prepared to be a grandmother. A hospital chaplain was standing by the nurse's station. Dorothy paused. She looked at the chaplain, then at the nurse next to him. She knew the truth before a single word was spoken. A mother always knows. "No," she said. Just that single word. The chaplain moved closer and spoke in a gentle voice. He used the kind of words people learn when their job is to deliver the most terrible news a person can hear. Dorothy did not register any of it. All she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and a baby crying from down the hall. It was her grandchild, one of her grandchildren, crying for a mother who would never come. Dorothy sank down, not into a chair, but onto the floor. Right there in the hallway, she sat on the cold tile, pressed her hands to her face, and let out a sound that was not a word. It was not a scream. It was something more ancient than words, something that rises from a place so deep within a mother that few people ever witness it. It was the sound of a heart literally breaking. A nurse knelt down beside her and in another offered her a glass of water. The chaplain stood by, waiting. Grant came down the hallway. He walked over to Dorothy, knelt, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I am so sorry, Dot," he said, his voice even and rehearsed. She fought with everything she had. The babies are all healthy. She would want us to focus on them now. Dorothy looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears, rage, and a sadness so vast it seemed to fill the entire corridor. She looked at her son-in-law, and something changed inside her. It was a feeling she could not yet identify, but it was there, like a faint whisper of warning. She nodded. She allowed the nurse to help her to her feet. She wiped her eyes on the back of her hand and asked to see her grandchildren. The neonatal unit was warm and quiet. The machines beeped softly and rhythmically, like tiny heartbeats. Dorothy went to Margot's incubator first. The baby was incredibly tiny, 5 pounds and 2 ounces, with a hint of dark hair already showing. And she had Colleen's nose, that same gentle, upward curve at the tip, the same fine bridge. Dorothy's hands were trembling so much that a nurse had to guide her hand into the incubator. She touched Margot's hand with just one finger. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around hers. It was an instinct, a reflex, but it felt like a message, as if Colleen were reaching out through her daughter, saying, "I am still here. I am still here, Mom." Dorothy stayed there for a long time. She touched each of her grandchildren, Margot, Bridget, and Theodore. She memorized their faces, the sound of their soft breathing, the way Bridget's eyelids twitched as she slept, the way Theodore's mouth formed a small O, as if he were surprised to be in the world. She remained until the nurses gently advised her to get some rest. She did not rest. She went to the waiting room, sat in a hard plastic chair, and stared at the wall. At one point, she got up to get a drink from the water fountain. The waiting room window looked out over the parking garage. Through the glass, in the yellow glow of the garage lights, she saw Grant. He was standing beside his car. He wasn't by himself. A woman was with him, young, with dark hair and bright red lipstick. Even in the middle of the night, she was holding his hand, her head resting on his shoulder. He wasn't pulling away. He wasn't crying. Dorothy stood frozen at the window. The small paper cup of water in her hand slowly collapsed. Water trickled over her knuckles and dripped silently to the floor. She felt nothing. She watched them until they finally parted, until the woman went to her own car, until Grant adjusted his tie and headed back toward the hospital doors. Dorothy sank back into her chair. She placed the ruined cup on the little table. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. She did not sleep that night, not for a single minute. Instead, she began to plan. The funeral was on a Thursday. White lilies flanked the aisle of the First Presbyterian Church. 300 people filled the wooden pews. The casket was closed. Dorothy had been firm about that. She couldn't stand the idea of 300 pairs of eyes on her daughter's face, whispering about how peaceful she looked, as if there was anything natural about death. The church was thick, with the scent of flowers, candle wax, and the subtle perfume of too many people crowded together. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the floor. Patches of red, blue, and gold lay there, beautiful and uncaring. The light didn't know that Colleen Ashford was gone. Grant stood at the podium. He wore a dark suit, navy instead of black, with a silver tie. His hair was perfectly combed, but his eyes were bloodshot. He was holding a folded sheet of paper. He opened it carefully and looked out at the faces before him. "Colleen was the light of my life," he began, his voice cracking just a little on the word light, just enough to make 300 people lean in, their hearts aching for him. "She was the kindest, most loving, and most selfless person I have ever known," he went on. "She gave our family everything. She gave our children everything. She carried 3 new lives, and she fought for them with her very last breath. That was Colleen, a fighter, a mother, my best friend. He stopped, pressing his lips into a thin line as he glanced down at the paper. When he looked up again, tears were glistening on his cheeks. I don't know how I'll go on without her, he said, but I know she would want me to try. For Margot, for Bridget, and for Theodore. For our family. He walked down from the podium to quiet applause. A few people even rose to their feet in a standing ovation for his grief. Dorothy remained seated in the front row. She didn't stand, she didn't clap, she just sat there, hands folded, her back perfectly straight, her eyes locked on a distant point past the altar. She was thinking about the hospital parking garage, about the woman with the red lipstick holding her son-in-law's hand just 4 hours after her daughter had died. Fletch, Colleen's older brother, sat next to her at 35 years old. He was built like a man who worked on the docks, with hands like baseball gloves. He hadn't said a thing since he flew in from Portland, not a single word. He just sat in the pew, staring at Grant, the muscles in his jaw working as if he were chewing rocks. "I'm not going crazy," Dorothy whispered, so low only Fletch could hear. "Something is very wrong with him." "Your sister called me 6 weeks ago, crying," Fletch said, his voice a low rumble. "She hung up before she told me what was wrong." Fletch said nothing more, but his huge hands tightened into fists on his knees. At the very back of the church, a woman was signing the guest book. She wrote in neat script, "Vivian Holloway, a close friend of the family." She was dressed in black, a fitted and expensive-looking dress. Her lipstick was red. Not a subtle, quiet red, but the kind of bold red that makes an entrance, the kind that says, "I am here and I have nothing to hide." She took a seat in the last row. She didn't shed a tear. She watched Grant give his speech with an unreadable expression, a mix of pride, patience, and ownership. She looked like someone watching a long-term investment finally pay off. After the service, everyone gathered in the fellowship hall. There were casseroles, cold cuts, and far too many desserts, the kind of food people bring when they don't know what else to do. Dorothy stood near the window, accepting condolences, hugs, and the same phrases repeated endlessly. "She's in a better place. She's watching over her babies. You'll get through this. Time heals all wounds." Dorothy knew that wasn't true. Time doesn't heal. It just carves out more room inside you to hold the pain. Jolene Marsh found her near the coffee station. She had been Colleen's best friend since the 7th grade. 34 years old, with freckles, red hair, and eyes that had been puffy from crying for 3 days. "Dot," Jolene said, grabbing Dorothy's arm, "I have to tell you something. Colleen called me about 8 weeks before she was due. She told me something very strange. She said, if anything happened to her during the delivery, I needed to check the closet in the nursery, behind the baby blankets. She made me repeat it." "I just laughed it off," Jolene added. But she wasn't laughing. Dorothy looked straight at Jolene. The low hum of the fellowship hall seemed to disappear. The casseroles, the sympathies, the hushed conversations. It all vanished. "The nursery closet," Dorothy repeated. Jolene nodded. "Behind the baby blankets." She was very specific. Dorothy stored the information away. She didn't let her face show anything. She didn't make an excuse to rush home. She simply nodded, squeezed Jolene's hand, and said, "Thank you." She had learned one thing in her 61 years. When you know you are being watched, you never reveal your hand. And Grant's mother, Laurel Ashford, was watching her from across the room, 67 years old, with silver hair and a perfect helmet, and always wearing pearls. She hadn't said a word to Dorothy since the hospital. Not one. She hadn't offered a single word of comfort or asked about the babies. She just stood with her group of friends, watching Dorothy, like a predator, watches its prey, sizing her up. 3 days after the funeral, Dorothy started noticing things. Grant never got up for the nighttime feedings, not once. The nanny handled everything. The nanny, a 26-year-old named Tessa, was Vivian's old college roommate. Grant had hired her within 72 hours of Colleen's death, without consulting Dorothy or anyone else. In that same time frame, Grant had also called Colleen's life insurance provider. He had canceled her membership at the country club. He had taken her name off their joint bank account. He had boxed up her clothes, her shoes, and her coats, and sent them to charity without asking Dorothy or Fletch if they wanted to keep anything for the babies. Dorothy kept quiet. She wrote it all down. Dates, times, and details went into a small notebook she carried in her purse. The same purse Colleen had given her for Mother's Day 2 years ago. It was made of brown leather, with a little monogram on the clasp that read, EDB, for Dorothy Brennan. On the 4th night after the funeral, Dorothy heard a voice coming from the baby monitor. She was in the guest room, and the monitor was on the nightstand next to her bed. First there was static, then a voice that was not the nanny's. It was younger, smoother, like honey. Soon, the voice purred, this will all be ours, baby. Just a little more patience. Dorothy shot up in bed, her eyes wide, staring at the monitor's pulsing green light. The voice was gone. She heard footsteps, a door clicking shut, and then nothing but silence. The next morning, Dorothy found a sympathy card on the kitchen counter. It wasn't in the pile with all the others. It was set apart, placed right next to the coffee machine as if it were a note on a grocery list. The front of the card showed white lilies. The message inside was handwritten, "To my love, the worst is over. Now we can finally begin. V." Dorothy read it twice. She put it back down in the exact same spot. She poured a cup of coffee, took a sip, and walked to the window to look out at the driveway. The card wasn't hidden. That was the detail that chilled her to the bone. They hadn't even tried to hide it. That was a level of arrogance, a level of confidence that was terrifying. They were sure no one would ever notice, that no one would dare to question them. They believed the grieving grandmother was too old and too heartbroken to see what was right in front of her. They were wrong. Dorothy took her coffee out to the garage. She opened the door to Colleen's car, a white Honda Accord. She didn't turn it on, she just sat in the driver's seat. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the last traces of her daughter's life. Sunglasses in the cup holder, a half-empty water bottle, a prenatal vitamin stuck to the console, a hair tie looped around the gear shift. She could still smell the faint scent of the vanilla lotion her daughter always used. Colleen had been right here, in this very seat, alive. She had been driving to doctor's appointments, going to the store to buy furniture for the nursery, singing along with the radio. She had rested her hand on her own huge belly, feeling the kicks of 3 tiny pairs of feet. Dorothy gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She did not cry. She was far too angry for tears. Right now, anger was better than grief. Anger had a purpose. Grief was just a dead weight. She sat in that car for 45 minutes. When she finally got out, her coffee was cold. She poured it right down the garage drain and went back inside. She gave the nanny a faint smile, kissed each baby on their forehead, and praised Grant for a breakfast he never made. That night, after the house fell silent and Grant had locked himself in his study, Dorothy crept into the nursery. She knelt by the closet, pushed aside a pile of baby blankets, and found it. Just as Jolene had said, A manila envelope was taped to the back wall. It was hidden behind stacks of soft blankets that smelled like baby powder and lavender. On the front, in her daughter's handwriting, were two simple words: for Mom. Dorothy clutched the envelope to her chest and closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She wouldn't open it yet. Not in this house, where secrets were whispers in the walls, and the man down the hall was already texting the woman who signed funeral guest books in red lipstick. She slipped the envelope into her jacket, stood, and tidied the blankets. Turning off the light, she knew she had to read it somewhere safe, somewhere Grant Ashford would never find her. Dorothy drove to the public library's parking lot on Maple Street. She pulled into a spot under a streetlight, locked her doors, and cut the engine. The envelope lay on the passenger seat, sealed and heavy. The weight of her daughter's final words seemed to press into the fake leather. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside, she found 5 things. First, a handwritten letter, 8 pages long, front and back. It was in Colleen's perfectly neat script, the kind of writing you would expect from a former paralegal who made sure every word was clear. Second, a small black USB drive taped to an index card that read, "Everything is on here. Dates, recordings, financial records. Give to Emmett." Third, a copy of a phone bill, not from their family plan, but a separate account in Grant's name. It showed hundreds of calls and texts to the same number, day after day, sometimes 20 times a day. Fourth, screenshots printed on photo paper of text messages between Grant and Vivian going back 2 years. There were affectionate messages, messages planning meetups, messages about a future together. It was a future that clearly did not include Colleen. And last, a handwritten note on a small piece of folded paper. "Mom, if you're reading this, I was right. Don't let him take my babies. The drive has everything." Dorothy read the note 3 times before setting it in her lap. She then picked up the letter, her daughter's words illuminated by the yellow glow of the streetlight. Colleen's voice filled her head with every sentence, every carefully chosen word. This wasn't the voice of a paranoid or hormonal pregnant woman. It was the voice of someone who had spent months piecing together the truth. The letter started simply, "Mom, I know how this looks. A pregnant woman getting paranoid. That's what Grant says. That's what his mother says. But I'm not paranoid. I found the texts. I saw the photos. He has been with her for 2 years, the entire time we were trying for these babies. The whole time I was at fertility clinics, getting shots, getting my hopes up, only to have them crushed. He was with her." Dorothy's hands shook as she pressed the paper against the steering wheel to continue reading. It was in his coat pocket, the letter read. A receipt from the Winslow Hotel downtown charged to his personal card. It showed an order for rose petals and champagne for 2 glasses. I was at home, eating saltines because my morning sickness was so bad I could barely move. He was drinking champagne in a hotel room with another woman. I confronted him. He denied everything. He said I was just hormonal, that the pregnancy was making me irrational. He suggested I talk to someone, meaning a therapist. He wanted me to think I was the problem. The letter went on for pages. Colleen wrote about finding more proof. A second phone tucked away in Grant's gym bag, credit card bills showing expensive dinners and jewelry she never saw, and a woman's earring in his car that wasn't hers. She described how she hired a private investigator, paying him with cash from her savings. The investigator confirmed the affair with photos, hotel bills, and restaurant receipts. The woman was Vivian Holloway, a 29-year-old real estate agent. She had been with Grant for at least 2 years, but it was the end of the letter that made Dorothy's breath catch in her throat. "Mom, I'm not writing this because I think I'm going to die. I'm writing this because Grant has been asking about my life insurance policy. He asked me 3 times in the last 2 weeks how much it was worth. He asked when it would pay out. He even asked if there were any exclusions for complications during childbirth. And last Thursday, he asked Dr. Prescott if complications during triplet deliveries were common. He asked it so casually, like he was just asking about the weather, like he was checking a box. Dorothy put the letter down, her breath fogging the windshield as she stared at the dark library. Her heart pounded in her temples. She picked the letter back up. I changed my will 3 weeks ago. Emmett helped me. If anything happens, the house goes to you. The savings go into a trust for the babies. Grant gets nothing. I know it sounds harsh, but a man who asks about his pregnant wife's life insurance policy 3 times in 2 weeks doesn't deserve her money. He doesn't deserve her children. He doesn't deserve her memory. I hope you never have to read this letter. I hope I'm just being paranoid. I hope I come home with 3 healthy babies and we can burn this envelope and laugh about it one day. But if I don't, if the worst happens, then you have everything you need. Fight for them, Mom. Fight for them like you fought for me and Fletch after Dad died. Like you always fight. You're the strongest person I know. You're the only one I trust. I love you. Now go be their grandmother. Your collie. Dorothy carefully folded the letter along its original creases and held it to her chest. She closed her eyes. The parking lot was now deserted, and a lone streetlight hummed above. In the distance, a train horn blew a long, sad note. She didn't cry. She was past tears now, in a place where grief had sharpened into something hard, something with a purpose. She looked at the envelope, the USB drive, the phone bill, and the screenshots. Her daughter had been a paralegal for 6 years before marrying Grant. She knew how to build a case and organize evidence. She knew that documentation was the key to winning any fight. The envelope was perfectly organized with color-coded tabs and a small table of contents on a sticky note. A blue tab for financial records, red for text messages, green for the private investigator's report, and yellow for the will. Even while terrified and carrying 3 babies, with her husband lying to her face every day, Colleen had been thorough and methodical. She was preparing for war. Dorothy started the car and drove straight to Emmett Calloway's house. It was after 10 at night. She didn't bother to call. She pulled into his driveway, walked up to his door, and knocked. Holding the manila envelope that held the last testament of her daughter's courage. Emmett, a man of 45 with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, opened the door. Wearing a cardigan and reading glasses, he had been Colleen's godfather since the day she was born. He taught her how to ride a bike and gave her her first paralegal job at his law firm. He was the one who helped her change her will just 3 weeks before she died. He looked at Dorothy, then at the envelope in her hands, and stepped aside to let her in without a single word. They sat at his kitchen table until 2 in the morning. Emmett read every single page. He plugged in the USB drive and went through the financial records, the phone logs, the investigator's photos, and all the text messages. One message in particular made Emmett put down his coffee and push his glasses up on his forehead. It was from Grant to Vivian, dated 4 months before the delivery. Once the babies are born and things settle down, we'll be free. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She always does. He was planning this, Emmett said quietly. Before she even delivered, he was planning to take everything. Dorothy simply nodded. She already knew. She had known since the parking garage, since the red lipstick, since that phony sympathy card on her kitchen counter. "What do we do?" she asked. Emmett closed the laptop and looked at her. His godchild was gone. His colleague was gone. The woman he swore to protect was gone, and he was already calculating the value of her life in dollars. She had grown from a little girl with a gap in her smile to a brave, thoughtful woman, and now she was dead. We will do what Colleen would have wanted, he told himself. We will fight. 2 weeks after the funeral, Grant told Dorothy she had to leave. He did it at breakfast, over eggs and toast, while pouring orange juice from a glass pitcher Colleen had found at a market in Vermont. Dorothy remembered that day, a crisp October Sunday, with the leaves turning. Colleen held that pitcher to the light, loving how the glass captured the autumn colors. Now, Grant used it like it was nothing, a simple container with no story. Dot, he began, his voice practiced and calm. I think it would be best if you went home now. The babies need a steady routine, and your presence has been, well, a little disruptive. Dorothy put her fork down. She looked straight at him. Disruptive, she repeated. He claimed the nanny, Tessa, said she hovered over the babies, coming into their room at all hours and messing up their schedule. I am just thinking of what is best for them, he said. What is best for them is their grandmother, Dorothy stated plainly. A tiny muscle and Grant's jaw tightened. Most people would have missed it, but Dorothy saw. I truly appreciate all you have done, he said, but this is my house, and these are my kids. I need to create a routine that works for us. Dorothy took a slow sip of her coffee and smiled. Of course, she said. You are right. I will go pack my things. She did not believe a single word she was saying. She just needed more time. She needed her lawyer, Emmett, to get the papers filed. She had to be smart. Colleen's letter had taught her that. Do not react. Document everything. Build your case. And then you strike. She left that afternoon and checked into a hotel 3 miles down the road, close enough to return in minutes, far enough that Grant thought he had won. Within a few days, Vivian moved in, not into the main house, but into the small guest cottage Colleen had used as an office. It was where she kept her files, printed the screenshots, and wrote that final letter. Vivian remade the space instantly. New curtains went up, new sheets went on the bed, and a vase of flowers appeared on the desk where Colleen's computer used to be. She told the nanny she was just helping Grant through this hard time. She told the neighbors she was a close family friend. She told anyone who would listen that those poor babies needed a mother. She never mentioned that she had been sleeping with their father for the last 3 years. The changes were quick and cold. 3 weeks after Colleen died, Vivian was managing the nanny's hours, had redecorated the living room, and had taken down all the photos of Colleen. She replaced them with generic art, cold shapes, and lines with no heart and no warmth. Nothing to suggest a family had ever lived there. Jolene, Colleen's best friend, called Dorothy one evening, her voice tense. Dot, you have to see this, she said. Check Vivian's social media right now. Dorothy opened her phone and found the account. It was public, of course. Vivian wanted an audience. The post was a picture of tiny baby shoes, hand-stitched with little yellow daisies. Dorothy's heart stopped. She knew those shoes. Those were Colleen's shoes. Jolene had been there when Colleen bought them, 8 months pregnant, walking through a small shop. Colleen had held them beaming, and said, These are the ones. They're perfect. She had bought a pair for each of her babies. And now, here they were, staged on a marble counter, with Vivian's caption, Sometimes life gives you a second chance at family. Dorothy put her phone down on the hotel bed. She pressed her hands against her legs, breathing in and out, like a woman waiting for an explosion. The next morning, Emmett called with news that was even worse. He had talked to the life insurance company. Grant had already submitted the claim for $750,000. The policy was increased 6 months ago, up from $200,000. The change required Colleen's signature. The signature is not a match, Emmett said. I had an expert look at it. It is not Colleen's handwriting. Forged, Dorothy said. It had to be. She closed her eyes. Her daughter's life turned into a number. A fake signature that would pay for Grant's new life with the woman posting pictures of her baby's shoes. There is more, Emmett continued. My accountant reviewed the files from the drive. Grant opened a company 18 months ago. He moved $320,000 from their joint account into it over a year, in small amounts, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, so it would not raise any flags. Where did that money go? He bought a 2-bedroom condo downtown. The title is in Vivian's name. Dorothy was silent. He also paid Vivian $4,000 a month, calling them consulting fees. And Dot? Emmett paused. Colleen's $85,000 inheritance from her father? Grant moved it all into his company 6 months ago. There is no record that Colleen ever approved it. Dorothy opened her eyes and saw her reflection in the mirror. She was 61 years old, with silver hair and lines around her eyes from a lifetime of joy and sorrow. She looked tired, and she was. But being tired was not the same as being defeated. File it all, she said. Whatever you need to file, whatever court we need to use. I want custody of my grandbabies, and I want Grant Ashford to pay for every single dollar he stole from my daughter. At the Triplets' 1-month checkup, Dorothy got there early. She had used her legal authority as the emergency contact to arrange it. She had all 3 babies in the stroller Colleen had picked out, the shipping tag still on the handle. As she was checking in, the office door swung open and Vivian walked in. She had a diaper bag on her shoulder and bottles in her hand, her lipstick a perfect shade of red. She went to the counter and smiled. I am here for the Ashford triplets. I am their stepmother, she announced. The waiting room fell silent. 4 other mothers looked up. The receptionist glanced from Dorothy to Vivian and back again. Dorothy did not yell. She did not cause a scene. She just reached into the stroller and lifted baby Margot into her arms. The baby snuggled against her chest, warm and alive. I have the appointment, Dorothy said calmly. These are my grandchildren. I am their emergency medical contact. This woman is not their stepmother. She is not part of their family, and her name is on none of their records. Vivian's smile flickered for a moment. Grant sent me. She recovered. He wanted me to be here. Grant is not here, Dorothy replied. I am. She turned her back on Vivian and carried Margot into the exam room. The nurse followed with the other 2 babies. Vivian was left standing at the reception desk, alone, holding bottles that nobody needed. After the appointment, Dorothy drove to the cemetery. She walked across the damp grass to Colleen's headstone. It was simple gray granite, with the words, Colleen Marie Ashford, beloved mother, daughter, friend. Dorothy sat on the ground next to the stone, not caring that the wet grass was soaking her pants. She straightened the lilies someone had left. She pulled a small weed from the base of the stone and wiped dirt from the carved letters with her thumb. She thought about those 3 words, mother, daughter, friend. They were all true, but they were not the whole story. They forgot to mention warrior. That is what her daughter was. A warrior who built her defense with envelopes, memory drives, and dated photos. A warrior who fought quietly because the man she loved had convinced her that speaking out made her sound crazy. Dorothy stayed until the groundskeeper began his evening rounds. She stood up, brushed off her pants, and touched the top of the stone. I found the envelope, Collie, she whispered. I found it all, and I am not stopping. She walked back to her car. The sun was setting in shades of orange, pink, and gold. They were the colors Colleen had loved, the colors she had chosen for the nursery. A sunset for the 3 babies who would grow up surrounded by its warmth. Dorothy started the car and drove back to the hotel. She ordered chicken soup from room service and ate all of it. She called Emmett and told him to file for grandparent custody first thing in the morning. Then, She sat on her bed and opened a small notebook. She wrote down the date. She wrote down what happened at the doctor's office. She wrote Vivian's exact words. She noted the time and the names of anyone who might have heard. She closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand next to Colleen's letter. Two documents, one from her daughter and one from her, both building the same case, both fighting the same war, both protecting the same three small lives. Grant's lawyer was Bradford Whitfield III, a name that sounded like old money and an easy life. Her grief found her either in a public library parking lot after 10 at night or in a hotel room with a sad little minibar. Whitfield had filed for a restraining order against Dorothy. The court papers alleged she was emotionally unstable and overcome with grief, interfering with a father's right to bond with his newborn babies. It painted Dorothy as aggressive, irrational, and a toxic presence in the home. An attached statement, sworn by Grant's mother, Laurel Ashford, supported these claims. Laurel, the woman with the perfect pearls and judgmental eyes, described Dorothy as hysterical and unable to respect any boundaries. She claimed Dorothy had stormed into the pediatrician's office and caused a scene, scaring the infants and humiliating the family. Emmett read the entire petition twice behind the closed door of his office. He poured a glass of water, then called Dorothy. "They are trying to cut you off," he said. "It is a standard move. Isolate the grandmother, control the story, and make you appear unhinged before the custody battle even starts." "So what is our next step?" Dorothy asked. "We file our own petition," he replied. "We will request grandparent visitation rights, as the law allows. But crucially, I am also asking the court to appoint a guardian ad litem for the triplets. This is an independent lawyer who will represent only the children's best interests, not yours and not Grant's." "On what basis?" she asked. "On the basis that Grant moved another woman into his home just weeks after his wife passed away. On the basis that he employed that woman's college roommate to be the nanny. We will also present financial records that suggest possible fraud, and point to the children's own mother's writings, which show she was deeply worried about their future safety." There was a long silence on the phone. Through the window, Dorothy could hear the sounds of the city, horns honking and engines running, a world that kept moving while hers had shattered. "Do it," she finally said. Emmett also submitted a motion for a court-mandated DNA test for all three babies. He told Dorothy it was a normal step in these disputes, but she detected something else in his tone. It was a subtle shift in his voice, something hidden just under his words. "Why are you asking for a DNA test?" she questioned him. "Because the timeline of the affair directly overlaps with the in vitro fertilization treatments," Emmett answered. "And in my line of work, men who are dishonest about finances are usually dishonest about much more." The court date was set for 3 weeks away. That meant 21 days of waiting, of gathering evidence, of watching from a hotel as Vivian made herself at home in her daughter's house. Dorothy made use of every single day. She consulted with Emmett's forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Patricia, who peered through bifocals and spoke about numbers with the passion of a poet. Patricia laid out the financial trail with the precision of a surgeon. She pointed to the shell company, the transferred assets, the condominium in Vivian's name, and the monthly payments camouflaged as consulting work. She showed them the forged signature on the life insurance policy and the stolen inheritance. "He constructed a castle of paper," Patricia explained. "It looks solid, but it is all built on a foundation of lies." Jolene also gave a statement describing the strange phone call from Colleen about the nursery closet and the cryptic social media post showing baby shoes. She recounted 3 years of friendship with a woman who had been slowly and systematically hollowed out, changing from vibrant and confident to quiet and fearful. A woman who once spoke her mind began to whisper. She was different, Jolene told Emmett in her deposition, especially in the last 2 years. She stopped calling as often. She skipped book club. She was always exhausted, always had an excuse, and was always making apologies for Grant's behavior. I never pushed her on it. I should have. I should have asked her what was wrong. That is a regret I will carry with me forever. Fletch arrived from Portland and checked into the hotel room right next to Dorothy's. He came with a single suitcase, a toolbox, and a dangerous look in his eyes that deeply concerned everyone who cared about him. I promise I will not do anything reckless, he assured Dorothy, but I am not leaving your side until this is over. The days leading up to the hearing felt incredibly heavy, thick with a tension that settled deep in your lungs and made your own heartbeat sound too loud. Dorothy spent each morning in the hotel gym, walking steadily on the treadmill, not running, just moving forward, one foot in front of the other, which is how you get through just about anything. In the evenings, she read through Colleen's pregnancy journal. Emmett had managed to get it from the nightstand during a supervised visit to gather her personal belongings. It was a simple spiral notebook with a light purple cover. Colleen had made entries almost every day. The journal began full of hope. Week 8. I heard their heartbeats today, all 3 of them. I sat in the car and just cried. Grant smiled, but he did not cry. Maybe men do not cry over heartbeats. Week 12. The morning sickness is awful, but I do not mind at all. I have 3 healthy babies growing inside me. I would be sick for 9 straight months if I knew they would be safe. Week 16. We chose names. Grant liked very traditional names. I wanted names with more meaning. We met in the middle. Margot, for my grandmother, Bridget, for his aunt, and Theodore, because Colleen always loved the nickname Teddy. But then, the tone of the entries began to shift, first subtly, and then with alarming clarity. Week 20. Grant felt them kick for the first time, and he cried. Maybe I was wrong about men and heartbeats. Week 22. He missed the ultrasound. His phone rang, and he just left. I heard him say the word baby to the person on the other end of the line. He calls me Colleen, but he calls her baby. Week 24. I found an earring in his car under the passenger seat. It was small and gold. It was not mine. I never wear gold. Week 26. He came home smelling of perfume again. Not my perfume. Not the kind you buy from a big department store. It was the kind you choose for a specific person, someone you have studied. Week 28. I hired a private investigator. I paid him in cash so Grant would not know. Week 30. The investigator confirmed everything. Her name is Vivian Holloway. She is 29 years old and works in real estate. She has been with my husband for a minimum of 2 years. It is possible it started before the in vitro fertilization. It is possible it has been going on from the very beginning. Dorothy shut the journal. She rested her hand on its purple cover, feeling the faint impressions of Colleen's pen. She could sense the physical weight of her daughter's hand as she wrote down every betrayal, all alone, while her husband was texting goodnight to another woman. She read the final entry from week 32, written just 6 days before the babies were born. I am not staying with him because I am weak. I am staying. Because there are 3 children inside me, and he would follow me anywhere I tried to go. But I'm preparing. Every single day I am preparing. My mom has no idea yet. No one does. But they will know. When the moment is right, they will all know. She had been decorating their nursery while secretly planning her own liberation. She was assembling cribs and assembling a legal file at the same time. She was picking out baby blankets while hiding evidence behind them. Colleen had been a woman fighting a war on 2 separate fronts, and no one ever knew. She fought in silence because Grant had made her believe that if she spoke up, it would mean she was crazy. Dorothy closed the book. She set it next to the letter and the other notebook. 3 documents, 3 testaments from 3 women were now stacked on her hotel nightstand. She switched off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the hum of the heating system. She thought about her daughter, the woman Colleen was before Grant. She was loud and funny, the type of person who made friends with strangers in the checkout line, who never forgot a birthday, who danced around the kitchen. That woman had been systematically erased, replaced by someone who was quiet, someone who was careful, someone who wrote everything down because she was sure no one would ever believe her otherwise. Dorothy pulled the covers up to her chin and stared at the dark ceiling. "You were right, Collie," she whispered into the empty room. "You were right about every last thing, and I am so sorry I did not see it when you were trying to tell me." The ceiling offered no reply. The heater kept humming. The hotel was silent, except for the faint sound of a television down the hall, the low voice of a news anchor, a burst of laughter from a commercial. Dorothy did not fall asleep, but she did rest. She knew she would need all her strength for the day to come. The courtroom was not as large as Dorothy had imagined. Room 412. Family Court. 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like floor wax and old coffee, and the buzzing fluorescent lights made everyone look exhausted. Dorothy had not slept well at all. She was wearing a simple navy dress that Colleen had picked out for her 2 Christmases ago. She carried a brown leather purse with her initials, DB, monogrammed on the side. Tucked inside was Colleen's letter, folded neatly along its original creases. It was always with her now. Grant showed up with Whitfield. He was flawless in a dark suit and tie, his hair perfectly in place. He had the look of a man who got a full 8 hours of sleep, a man without a single care in the world. He gave Dorothy a polite, controlled nod from across the aisle, the kind of gesture meant for an audience. Behind him sat his mother, Laurel, with her perfect pearl necklace and pristine bob haircut. She stared straight at the judge's bench, ignoring Dorothy completely, as if waiting for a show to start. Grant's lawyer, Whitfield, began. He painted Grant as a devoted father and heartbroken husband, left to raise 3 infants alone after losing his wife. He called Dorothy well-meaning but overbearing, repeating the word 4 times. He mentioned boundaries 6 times, implying Dorothy's grief blinded her to the line between love and control. Dorothy had to admit, the lawyer was good. He had the expensive, calm confidence that cost $500 an hour. Then Laurel testified, claiming Dorothy had always disapproved of Grant and tried to run her daughter's life. She said Dorothy had appeared at the hospital without an invitation and would not leave, even when asked multiple times. She claimed Dorothy had been embarrassing and inappropriate at the doctor's office. Every statement was, on the surface, true, but twisted to be completely misleading. That was the brilliance of their strategy. Money did not buy outright lies. It bought distortion. The art of bending the truth to point the wrong way. Dorothy's lawyer, Emmett, was patient. He let them speak, allowing their words to hang in the air. Then he rose. "Your Honor," he began, "I have proof that Mr. Ashford's version of events is not just incomplete. It is a deliberate deception." He produced the financial documents, the shell company, the transferred money, the condo bought for his mistress, the forged signature on the insurance policy, the secret payments, the stolen inheritance. Grant's lawyer objected again and again, but the judge overruled him each time. Emmett then introduced the text messages, reading 3 aloud. One talked about being free after the babies arrived. Another mentioned how his wife would sign anything he gave her. The last one was from his mistress, sent just 2 days after the funeral. When can I stop being your secret? I have waited long enough. The atmosphere in the courtroom changed instantly. It was as if 300 invisible strings suddenly pulled tight, connecting everyone in the room. The judge then invited Dorothy to respond. She stood, looking first at the judge, then at Grant and his mother. Her voice broke as she tried to speak. She paused, took a deep breath, and began again. Your Honor, my daughter is gone. She left 3 babies who will never know the sound of her voice, never feel her arms around them, never hear the lullaby I used to sing to her. The room was utterly still. No one coughed, no one moved. The man who should have protected her moved his mistress into their home while the funeral flowers were still fresh. He forged her name to steal her insurance money. He stole her inheritance. He took down her pictures, and now he dares to call me overbearing. Her voice was strong now, quiet and clear, the sound of a woman past her breaking point. I am not here because I am overbearing, or because I cannot let go. I am here because my daughter asked me to be. She left me a letter, evidence, and a promise. I plan to keep that promise. The judge observed Dorothy for a long time, then looked at Grant and the binders of evidence. She ordered a DNA test. She granted Dorothy temporary, supervised visits and denied Grant's restraining order. A single muscle in Grant's jaw twitched, almost invisible, but Dorothy saw it and held his gaze. Outside, Dorothy's son, Fletch, was pacing anxiously. He had not been allowed in the courtroom. He was practically humming with nervous energy. When Grant left through a side door, Fletch intercepted him. You killed my sister, Fletch said, his voice dangerously low and controlled, more chilling than a yell. Maybe not with your own hands, but you shattered her heart until her body gave up. You took her money, her peace of mind, and her trust. Now you want her children. Grant paused and looked at Fletch, adjusting his shirt cuffs and collar, like a man who felt he was above such scenes. Your sister was unwell, Fletcher, he said, his tone deceptively calm and gentle. Mentally, the pregnancy amplified it. I was only trying to protect my family. It is a shame you do not understand that. Fletch's hands were shaking. Dorothy gripped his arm tightly, a silent warning to stay calm, to wait. Fletch took a step back and exhaled. He looked at Grant. Colleen knew, he said. She saw through your lies, your excuses, your fake smiles. She knew exactly who you were, and she made sure everyone else would too. Grant did not answer. He got into his car and just sat there for a long time without starting the engine. That night, Dorothy was alone in her hotel room when her legs buckled. She found herself sliding down the bathroom wall onto the cold tile floor, clutching her daughter's letter. I do not know if I can do this, Collie, she whispered. I am 61. I am up against a rich man with lawyers and a mother who perjures herself. I just do not know if I have the strength. The small bathroom had a single, harsh light that revealed everything. In the mirror, she saw her own reflection, but she also saw her daughter's eyes staring back at her. They were the same green, with the same gentle tilt at the corners. Seeing Colleen in her own face gave her strength. She pushed herself up from the floor, stood tall, and faced the mirror directly. She splashed her face with cold water, dried it with a towel, and then walked to the phone on the nightstand. She dialed the front desk. She requested extra towels, not because she needed them, but because she needed to break the silence. The quiet in the room was too much like the silence in the hospital after the doctor had given her the terrible news. A cheerful young clerk promised to send towels right away and asked if she needed more. She said no and hung up. Sitting on the bed, she opened a notebook and wrote down everything: the date, what happened in court, what the judge said, what Grant and Fletch said. Then she put on her coat and drove to a 24-hour diner on Route 9. The place was warm and smelled of coffee, bacon, and old frying oil. A kind waitress, with tired eyes, took her order. "Apple pie and a black coffee," Dorothy said. She took a booth by the window and watched the waitress serve truckers and nurses working the late shift. She saw a young couple sharing pancakes at 2 in the morning. She savored every bite of the apple cinnamon pie with its buttery crust. It had been Colleen's favorite. They always used to share a slice on Sundays. Dorothy left a $40 tip for a $6 bill. On the drive back, she kept the windows down. The cold air stung her face and made her eyes water, but she did not turn on the heat. She wanted the cold to keep her awake, to remind her she was alive and still in the fight. 6 weeks went by. The DNA results could come at any moment. Emmett had walked her through all the possible outcomes and told her to be patient. But Dorothy was many things: stubborn, tired, heartbroken, but patient was not one of them. The call finally came on a Tuesday. She was folding laundry in her hotel room, tiny baby clothes she had bought for the triplets. She handled each little item with loving care. 3 little shirts, 3 pairs of socks, 3 tiny hats. Her entire world now came in sets of 3. Her phone buzzed, showing Emmett's name. "Dorothy," he said, "you need to sit down." She sat on the bed as a tiny white sock with a yellow duck fell to the floor. "The DNA results are in," Emmett told her. Dorothy held her breath, hearing only his breathing and the ticking of a clock. It felt like she could hear everything and nothing all at once. "The triplets," Emmett started, then paused to clear his throat. "Margot, Bridget, and Theodore, none of them are Grant's biological children." The room seemed to tilt, not in reality, but deep inside Dorothy. Something shifted, as if the floor had moved and the walls had stretched. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said none of them are his. Not one, not 2, but all 3. The official paternity test is conclusive. Grant Ashford is not the biological father of any of those babies." Dorothy steadied herself with a hand on the bed, feeling the texture of the cotton bedspread. She was still real, still here, still in this room, living this life, where the floor was always disappearing from beneath her. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Emmett explained it to her slowly and deliberately, the way you explain something that will change everything that comes after. He said that Colleen and Grant had been trying in vitro fertilization for 3 years at the Whitfield Fertility Clinic. Grant had been informed that his sperm count was low, but still viable. After 3 unsuccessful rounds of implantation where Grant's samples were repeatedly flagged as non-viable, the clinic suggested using donor material, which was a standard backup option. Colleen signed the consent form for an anonymous donor all by herself. Grant never signed it. Grant was never told. The clinic's official records showed that only Colleen's signature was on the donor consent form. She knew, Dorothy stated, her voice flat. It was not a question. "Yes, she knew," Emmett confirmed. The clinic told her, after the second failed attempt, that Grant's samples would not produce a viable embryo. They recommended a donor. She consented, and she never told him. Dorothy sat in silence for a very long time, her eyes fixed on the tiny baby sock on the floor. The yellow duck smiled, completely unaware. "Why?" Dorothy asked. "Why didn't she tell him?" "I found a journal entry," Emmett said, his voice soft. "From around that time. Colleen wrote it." He read it aloud to her. "The doctor told me Grant's samples won't work. They recommended a donor. I said yes. I didn't tell Grant because he would have refused. He would have said his pride was more important than our family. And I want these babies more than I want his approval. For the first time in my marriage, I made a choice that was just for me. Dorothy let the words sink in, finding their place in the new, terrible landscape of what she now knew about her daughter's life, her marriage, and her courage. Colleen didn't have an affair. She made a medical choice, secretly and alone, because the man she married was too proud to accept help, too vain to admit his body had failed, and too selfish to put his family before his ego. And that same man was now fighting for custody of 3 children who weren't biologically his, fighting for an insurance policy that was never rightfully his to claim, fighting to remove a woman who built her family without his help. So what is next? Dorothy asked. Grant's claim to sole custody was now exceptionally weak. He had no biological link to the babies, a clear history of financial deception, and proof of an affair. This gave him almost no legal ground against the children's biological grandmother and Vivian. And that, Emmett explained, is where things got really interesting. When Vivian learned about the DNA, her initial response was just what Grant's legal team dreaded. She was the one who was unfaithful, Vivian declared to Grant, to his mother, to anyone who would listen. She was the cheater. The babies are not even his. For 48 hours, Vivian thought she had won. She saw it as proof of Colleen's infidelity, proof that Grant was the true victim. She shared this story with her friends and her parents, almost broadcasting it online. Then, Emmett's office provided the clinic's documentation, the donor agreement, and the medical records of Grant's non-viable samples. The timeline demonstrated that Colleen did not have an affair. She had made a choice about her own body. This happened during a completely valid medical treatment. The story changed completely in one night. Colleen had not been unfaithful to Grant. Colleen had created a family despite him. She carried 3 babies for 8 months and navigated a high-risk pregnancy. She set up their nursery, painted their name signs, and drew hearts on their ultrasound pictures. She did all of this knowing the man next to her, in bed, was sleeping with another woman. Grant was not broken by remorse. He was broken by public shame. His masculinity, his family line, his name, none of it was in those 3 children. His mother called him that night. Laurel's voice was like ice. Those babies are now someone else's issue, she stated. Do not tarnish this family's reputation any more than you already have. She ended the call and never phoned again. The irony was clear to everyone. Grant had cheated for 3 years on the only woman who was actually creating their family. He had deceived, he had taken money, he had faked signatures. All the while, Colleen was doing the real, painful work. Enduring the injections and doctor visits. She faced the hope and the sorrow. She went through it by herself, without a word, knowing her husband's role in their family ended at the bedroom door. Dr. Nina Prescott phoned Dorothy later that evening. Her voice was soft and deliberate, the voice of someone holding a heavy secret for a long time. Mrs. Brennan, she said, I have to share something with you. Your daughter talked to me the week before she gave birth. She told me something I cannot forget. Dorothy held her breath. She said, if anything happens to me, make sure my mother gets the children, not Grant, my mother. I promised her everything would be fine. I was mistaken about that. But I recall her request, and I want you to know I will testify to it in court if necessary. Dorothy shut her eyes, holding the phone tightly to her ear. She could hear her daughter's voice instead of the doctor's. It was Colleen's voice, confident and strong. Not Grant, my mother. Dorothy thanked Dr. Prescott and hung up the phone. She remained in the hotel room as darkness fell. She didn't bother with the lights. She did not need them. Her vision was perfectly clear. She saw it all now. Grant took his story to the media. He found a local TV reporter from Channel 7, a woman with stiff hair and a practiced, understanding nod, who specialized in feel-good stories. Grant sat opposite her in his living room, a room now missing Colleen's pictures. He had on a casual button-down shirt, no tie. He looked like a man being open, a man with no secrets. "I adored my wife," he stated, as the camera focused on his eyes. They were moist, just the right amount to show deep feeling without any actual tears. "I believed we were raising a family together. I believed those children were mine. Learning the truth was the most shattering moment of my life." The reporter brought up the affair. Grant skillfully sidestepped it. "I made errors," he admitted. "I will not pretend I did not. But I always loved Colleen, and I always thought I was the father of those babies. That was stolen from me without my awareness. It happened without my permission." The story ran on the 6 o'clock news, then again at 10 o'clock, and then it appeared online. Within 48 hours, the comments section was divided. Half of the audience sympathized with Grant, while the other half did not. Grant had made a serious error in judgment. He was always masterful at influencing small groups, in courtrooms or at dinner parties. But the internet is not a small group. The internet is a global audience. And that audience had inquiries. If he loved his wife that much, why did his girlfriend move in just 2 weeks after the funeral? If he was unaware of the donor sperm, why was he already trying to claim the life insurance? Why did he fake his dead wife's name on documents? Emmett gave it 3 days. He let the narrative spread and the comments grow. Then, with Dorothy's approval, he provided a strategically chosen set of documents to the public. This included the forged life insurance form, the handwriting expert's report confirming it was not Colleen's signature, and the bank record showing $320,000 moved from their joint account to a company that bought a condo for Vivian. The timeline also proved the affair started before the fertility treatments. It began before the pregnancy, before everything. Grant had been involved with Vivian from the start. A single text message, part of the public court record, was available to any journalist. It was from Grant to Vivian, 4 months before Colleen passed away. It read, "Once the babies arrive and things calm down, we will be together. She will sign any document I give her. She always does." The public's view shifted, not slowly, but like a tidal wave, total, immediate, and overwhelming. Women shared the story across social media. Their captions were a mix of fury and knowing recognition. Comments came from women who had been through it, who had seen the secret texts, found the other phone, and been called paranoid or hormonal. They had been told they were losing their minds. Colleen became an icon, not just a sad story. She was the woman who shielded her children even after she was gone. The woman who prepared a legal battle while preparing a nursery. She fought her fight quietly and won it posthumously. Then, Vivian made a call to Emmett. It happened on a Thursday night. Emmett was working late when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He nearly ignored it, but answered just before it went to voicemail. "Mr. Calloway," a voice said, "my name is Vivian Holloway. I have to speak with you, and I believe you will want to listen to what I have to tell you." She visited his office the following morning. She wore no makeup, her hair was tied back, and her eyes were puffy. She appeared to be a woman who hadn't slept for days, a woman who had given up on pretending. She confessed everything to Emmett. Grant had been sending messages to another woman, not Colleen and not her. Her name was Danielle, a representative for a drug company. The messages started only 2 weeks after Colleen's death, while Vivian was moving her things into the guest house, while she was picking out new furniture and sharing pictures of baby items, thinking she had secured her future. "I saw the messages on his phone," Vivian admitted, just like Colleen discovered mine. "The pattern was repeating, only this time I am not pregnant, and I am not gone." She gave Emmett audio files of conversations she had secretly recorded on her phone over the last 2 weeks. Vivian revealed Grant's strategy for the custody battle, including his instructions for her to lie about their relationship's timeline. He explained that a single father wouldn't get the court's compassion, so he needed her in the picture. Then, she shared the detail that forced Emmett to put down his pen. He told me to be the mother his children needed, Vivian confessed. Not for them, and not because he wanted to be a real father. He needed me for the photo op, for his legal case. She explained that he used her just like he used Colleen, as a prop to create the perfect image he wanted the world to believe. Emmett studied her for a moment. "Why are you telling me all this now?" he asked. Vivian's eyes welled with tears as she stared at the expensive ring Grant had given her, the same one the investigator captured in photos. "I know I'm not the hero here," she admitted. "I knew he had a wife. I told myself the lie that she didn't value him. But I swear, I never knew about the insurance policy. I didn't know he forged her name, or that he was taking her money while she was carrying babies he made me believe were his." Vivian slipped the diamond from her finger and placed it on the desk. "I honestly thought he loved me. I was wrong about everything." Emmett lifted the ring, examined it briefly, then set it down. "Are you willing to testify to this?" he questioned. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Under oath, on the stand, on television, whatever it takes." Emmett called Dorothy later that day to explain that Vivian had switched sides. In her hotel room, Dorothy listened quietly for a long while before speaking. "I want to be perfectly clear. I don't forgive her," Dorothy stated firmly. "She was with my daughter's husband, in my daughter's house, taking pictures of my grandchildren's shoes. I will never forgive that." "I understand," Emmett replied. "But," Dorothy went on, "if her words can keep those children safe, then I'll accept her help. Colleen would have done the same. My daughter was pragmatic. She would use any tool at her disposal." That weekend, for the first time, Dorothy took the triplets to the park. It was their first outing from the house during her supervised time. The special stroller for 3, which Colleen had picked out, had been delivered 6 days after she was gone. Dorothy never took off the shipping label still hanging from the handle. It remained as a fragile paper reminder, with Colleen's name on it, a receipt from a mother who fully intended to be the one pushing her children. Dorothy pushed them for 2 hours, moving through the park, past the children playing, and around the duck pond. She passed the very bench where she and a little Colleen used to sit. She pushed away all thoughts of the courtroom, of Grant, and of the ugly details like DNA and forged documents. The parenting books claimed they were too young for laughter, but then she heard it. It was a tiny, bright noise, a sudden burst of happiness. For the entire 2 hours, she never once looked at her phone. The final hearing was that Monday in room 412. It had the same harsh lighting, the same old coffee smell, and the same chilly floor. But something in the room had changed. The atmosphere was tense, like the heavy air right before a storm. Dorothy chose her navy dress, the one Colleen had loved. She carried the brown bag with her monogram, and inside was Colleen's folded letter. She felt for it through the leather before taking her seat. It had become her good luck charm. Grant showed up by himself. He had replaced his lawyer with a younger, cheaper one who looked nervous. Grant's mother, Laurel, was absent. She had cut off contact 2 weeks prior, right after the story hit the news, and the Ashford name was linked to fraud and scandal. Emmett laid out his case with methodical and devastating clarity. He detailed the financial crimes, the fake signature, the secret company, the condo, and the stolen inheritance. Each piece of paper was submitted as evidence with surgical precision. It was a skill he might have learned from Colleen, or she from him. Regardless, the case was constructed just as Colleen would have done it, perfectly organized and color-coded. It was tabbed, organized and completely solid. The DNA report, clinic documents, and the donor form, signed by Colleen alone, were presented. So was the medical reasoning and her journal entry about why she acted on her own. Then came Vivian's testimony. She was calm and clear on the stand, never shedding a tear. She detailed the affair, the timeline, when and the messages about him being free. She presented recordings of Grant plotting against Dorothy and revealed there had been another woman. He never loved me, Vivian stated. He didn't love Colleen, and he doesn't love his children. He only loves his image, the story of a successful surgeon with a perfect family. We were just props for his narrative. When the plot changed, he tried to write a new ending. Grant's attorney's attempt to question her was short and useless. The proof was simply too strong, the timeline too exact. Next, Dr. Nina Prescott took the stand and recalled Colleen's simple instruction. If anything happens to me, please make sure my mother gets these babies. She repeated the words plainly because they needed no extra drama to be powerful. Jolene testified next. Speaking about Colleen's emotional state, she mentioned how the phone calls dwindled, how her laughter faded, and how she vanished from their book club. She was the friend Jolene wished she had tried harder to save. The court-appointed guardian then read her findings. After 4 weeks of interviews, home visits, and observing the triplets with both Dorothy and Grant, her conclusion was firm. The children's best interests are with their maternal grandmother, Dorothy Brennan, she read. Mrs. Brennan provides constant, loving care. Mr. Ashford has shown a history of deceit, financial wrongdoing, and a focus that is not on the children's needs. The judge deliberated for 2 hours. During that time, Dorothy sat frozen on a hallway bench, clutching her purse and just breathing. Fletcher walked endlessly, his boots creating a steady rhythm of worry on the floor. Jolene sat with Dorothy, holding her hand in silence. She didn't have to say anything. 34 years of friendship with Colleen taught Jolene that the women of this family valued presence over words. When the bailiff summoned them, everyone rose as the judge returned. The judge settled in, organized her documents, and put on her glasses. In the custody case of Margot, Bridget, and Theodore Ashford, she began, this court has reached a decision. Dorothy's heart pounded so hard she felt the beat in her throat and through the soles of her shoes. Full legal and physical custody is hereby awarded to Dorothy Ann Brennan. Dorothy shut her eyes. She didn't make a sound or shed a tear. She just absorbed the words. The court also orders Grant Ashford to return all money taken from the joint accounts and his late wife's inheritance. The fraudulent life insurance policy will be sent to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Grant remained perfectly still. His lawyer leaned in to say something, but Grant just gave a slight shake of his head. It was the gesture of a man with no options left. Mr. Ashford's medical license will be reviewed following the fraud investigation. All visitation requests from Laurel Ashford are denied. The judge then lifted her gaze from the documents and looked directly at Dorothy. Mrs. Brennan, your daughter, created a powerful legacy, not only of her love, but of evidence. This court acknowledges the incredible steps Colleen Ashford took to secure her children's future, and we are honored to carry out her final wishes. Dorothy opened her eyes, met the judge's gaze, and gave a single nod. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady and strong. After leaving the courtroom, Emmett gave Dorothy another envelope. It was smaller than the first, a white one, sealed with tape, addressed to Mom in Colleen's handwriting. She gave this to me 3 weeks before the babies were born, Emmett explained. She said to give it to you only when the custody fight was over. She told me you would need it then. Dorothy took the envelope. It felt light, holding only a few sheets of paper, but its significance felt immense. She waited to open it, not in the courthouse and not in her car. She went straight to the cemetery and sat on a bench not far from Colleen's headstone. The afternoon was sunny and warm, and new daffodils were just starting to bloom by the fence. Colleen always loved daffodils, saying they showed how life could endure the winter. Dorothy finally opened the letter. Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means the babies are safe because you fought for them. I know I should have told you everything sooner about Grant, the money, and the IVF. I was so ashamed. Not for using a donor, but for staying with someone who made me feel it was a secret to be kept. These babies are all mine. Every part of them, every little kick at 3 in the morning. I wanted them, I carried them, and I speak to them constantly. I've told them all about you. I told them you bake the world's best apple pie, that you always cry during sad commercials, and that you will love them fiercely, just like you loved me. I am not afraid of what comes next. I am scared of them being raised under Grant's influence. That is why I created this documentation. It is why I contacted Emmett and changed my legal arrangements. You are going to be exhausted, Mom, with 3 infants at 61. But I know you. I know your strength. You and Fletcher were raised by yourself after Dad passed. You held down 2 jobs and were at every school event. You're the most resilient person I have ever met. Tell them stories about me, but not the unhappy ones. Tell them I enjoyed gardening and silly reality shows, and that I was terrible at parallel parking. Tell them I wished for them every single day. I truly wanted them. I love you, Mom. Now, go be their grandmother, their mother, and their entire universe. Your Collie. Dorothy folded the paper carefully, following the original folds her daughter had made. Her daughter was a paralegal, organized to the very end, even in her love and her farewell. She placed the letter in her bag, alongside the first one, her wallet, and a small notebook. She would take it with her every day for the rest of her years, not because she needed a reminder, but because it felt like holding her daughter's hand. She got to her feet. She splashed water on her face from the cemetery's public fountain and used her sleeve to dry it. She saw her own reflection, her green eyes, which were also Colleen's eyes. She returned to Colleen's grave marker and stood there quietly. A breeze rustled the tree leaves. A bird, a red cardinal, against the gray limbs, sang from a distance. You saved them, Collie, Dorothy whispered. You saved your own babies from your final resting place. She placed her hand on the gravestone, feeling the warmth from the sunlight. She let it stay there for a moment, then went to her car. Fletch was there, and Jolene was there. The triplets were inside with their new nanny, a 53-year-old woman named Helen, who was recommended by Emmett's wife. She had warm hands and a gentle voice. Margot had drifted off to sleep on Helen's shoulder within 5 minutes of their first meeting. Dorothy entered the car and fastened her seatbelt. She glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw 3 car seats, 3 infants, 3 little faces. Margot was not asleep. Her green eyes were open, looking right at Dorothy. Dorothy smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in many months. It was not a brave smile. She did not cry. Instead, she started the car and drove away from the cemetery. Daffodils bloomed along the fence, their yellow heads a defiant splash of life against the green. 6 months on, the house on Birchwood Lane was different. It was not a dramatic change, like a remodel, but a slow, natural one, like a garden moving through the seasons. The framework was the same, but new life was pushing up everywhere. Dorothy had painted the master bedroom a soft yellow, Colleen's favorite color. It was the color of those daffodils, of lemon pie, and of the sun that filled the nursery window each morning at 6:15. The furniture remained. The bed Colleen had picked, the nightstands, her reading lamp. but the walls felt fresh, like a new start. She hung every single one of Colleen's photos back up on the walls, the mantel, and the tables. She also added new pictures, tracking the triplets at 1 month, then 2, then 3, creating a new timeline that grew right alongside them. There was Bridget's first smile and Margot's first tooth. Then there was Teddy, reaching for a spoon with the focus of a man set on conquering a mountain. Colleen's garden had bloomed again. Dorothy watered it each night, learning as she went. She was no gardener. Colleen had that gift. But Dorothy found her daughter's gardening journal, another notebook filled with that familiar, neat handwriting. It taught her about soil, sunlight, and the best tomatoes for their climate. The rosemary bush made it through the winter, and Dorothy saw it as a good sign. Grant took a plea deal, pleading guilty to insurance fraud. His third lawyer got him 3 years of probation, a heavy fine, and a permanent black mark on his medical license. His surgical practice was finished. The partners voted him out, and the hospital took away his privileges. His name, once featured in shiny brochures, now only appeared in court records and old news stories. Laurel Ashford cut him off completely, not out of any sympathy for Colleen or regret, but for a different reason. She was furious that he had shamed the family name. For Laurel, reputation was like breathing, automatic, vital, and not up for discussion. Her son had turned the Ashford name into a warning for others. Vivian simply vanished. She sold the condominium Grant had purchased with Colleen's money, and the funds were returned to the estate. She moved out of state, hoping for a fresh start. 3 months after the trial, she sent Dorothy a single text message that read, "I am sorry. I know that does not mean much." Dorothy saw it. She never wrote back, but she never deleted it either. It stayed on her phone, a small digital trace of a complicated person. It was a reminder that the woman who helped ruin her daughter's life also helped save her daughter's children. Dr. Nina Prescott started visiting regularly. She came by every 2 weeks with developmental charts. She also brought homemade chicken soup. She would check the baby's reflexes, measure their growth, and ask Dorothy about their sleeping and eating habits. But then, she would stay for coffee. They would sit at the kitchen table and talk about things beyond medicine, like the weather or a book she was reading. She spoke about her own mother, who had passed away 3 years prior and whom she missed dearly every day. They became friends, an unexpected duo, a 61-year-old grandmother and a 40-year-old doctor, connected by the woman they both loved, and a promise they were determined to keep. Jolene visited every Sunday, without exception. She would show up at 9 in the morning, holding a bag of bagels from the Highland Avenue bakery, the same one she and Colleen used to visit. She brought plain cream cheese for Dorothy, everything for Fletch, and strawberry, which had always been Colleen's choice. After they ate, Jolene read to the triplets from picture books, giving every character a unique voice. The bear's was deep and gravelly, while the mouse's was tiny and fast. Her own narrator's voice was always steady and comforting. Teddy would laugh at the exact same part every time, a sudden burst of joy that seemed to surprise him. "Your mother would have been so much better at this," Jolene once whispered to the babies. She held Bridget in her lap, who was busy chewing on a book's corner. She had the best bear voice. It sounded so real. "I can't do that, but I promise I'll keep trying for you." In the backyard, Fletch built a treehouse. It took him 3 full weekends, driving down from Portland every Friday evening. He used cedar planks and heavy-duty bolts, working from sunrise to sunset. He painted it green, which was Colleen's second favorite color. The treehouse was not for the babies, who at 6 months old could hardly sit up on their own. It was for their future. It was for when they were 5 and 7 and 10 years old. It was a place for them to climb, to dream, and to be a little closer to the sky and a little closer to their mom. He attached a small, simple plaque to the door. Imagine a mother, betrayed and dying, who wages one last war to save her children from the man who broke her heart. This is a story about how love can build a fortress that even death cannot tear down. If you believe a mother's love is the strongest force on earth, stay with me. Fletch showed Dorothy the sign on a Sunday. Hand-carved cedar, it read, "The Collie House." The fresh green paint stood out against the oak branches. "She would have loved it," Dorothy said, looking up. "She would have said your paint job is uneven," Fletch replied. A real, deep laugh escaped Dorothy, a sound she thought was lost to grief. It was proof that joy can find a way back. In the quiet evenings, after the babies were asleep, Dorothy would sit in the nursery's rocking chair, placed right between the three cribs. Margot to the left, Bridget in the center, and Teddy on her right. Colleen had found that chair at a yard sale and refinished it herself. It still had the faint smell of the lemon oil she always used. The old chair creaked gently, a steady, comforting rhythm. Dorothy watched her three grandchildren. 3 mobiles of stars and moons turned above them. 3 star-shaped nightlights, ordered by Colleen online, cast a soft glow on the ceiling. They had arrived 2 days after the funeral. Dorothy had been the one to plug them in. Margot always slept on her stomach, flipping over the moment you laid her on her back, a stubborn streak Dorothy knew well. It was pure Colleen. Bridget slept perfectly still on her back, her arms at her sides like a tiny soldier, her eyes dreaming behind their lids. At just 6 months old, Dorothy wondered what a baby could possibly dream of. Probably warmth and milk. And Teddy, the quietest one, slept on his side with a small fist tucked against his mouth. He was the most patient. He would wait for his bottle, wait for his turn to be held. He waited for Margot's chatter and Bridget's fussing to end before making his own little sound. It was not a cry, just a soft announcement. "I am here, and I am ready when you are." As Dorothy rocked, she knew people would call this story a tragedy. A young mother's death, a cheating husband, a messy court battle. But that was not the real story. The real story was about a mother who loved her children so fiercely she built them a lifeboat before the ship even began to sink. She gathered evidence, organized her will, and wrote letters. She prepared for the absolute worst while painting name plaques and singing to the 3 tiny heartbeats in her belly. This story was about a mother who fought her final battle in silence. And from beyond the grave, she won. Dorothy got up from the rocking chair and went to the window. The backyard was dark, the treehouse just a silhouette. A small golden circle from the porch light touched the steps. She saw the purple marker on the windowsill. It was the same one she had found in Colleen's desk. The one her daughter used to draw hearts on the ultrasound pictures. It was a rich, deep purple, the color of purpose. Dorothy took off the cap and drew a small heart on the wall by Margot's crib. Then she drew one next to Bridget's and another by Teddy's. 3 imperfect hearts. A grandmother's hand is not as steady as a mother's, but they were there. A permanent purple on the soft, yellow wall. She put the cap back on the marker. She would leave it there for when the babies were old enough to draw their own hearts. It was 11:45, almost a new day. She needed to rest. She had 3 6-month-olds who would wake her at 5:30 a.m. needing their bottles, and they would get the full force of her love. She would give them all of it. Every bottle, every diaper, every scraped knee, and every first step. She would give them everything, because that is what Colleen asked of her. And that is what Dorothy always did. She started to hum the lullaby she used to sing to Colleen, the one her own mother sang to her, the same one Colleen had sung to her belly for 9 months. It was a melody passed through 3 generations of women. The babies slept on, and the night lights glowed. The house was quiet. Outside, the first stars appeared over the treehouse with its green paint and its promise of future laughter. She had 3 of everything now: 3 mouths to feed, 3 futures to guide, 3 hearts that were beating because Colleen's had stopped. And Dorothy Brennan, at 61 years old, exhausted and silver-haired, was fiercely and completely alive. She would not trade a single second of it, not for anything. This story proves one powerful truth that no one can ever take from you. Real love does not end when a heart stops beating. A mother's love builds walls that outlast her. It writes letters that speak after she is gone. It protects children she will never get to hold. If this story moved you, please do one small thing for us. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and tell us which moment touched you the most. Share this with a woman who needs to be reminded of her own strength. And if you have not already, please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a powerful story like this one. We are only here because of you. Every like, every comment, and every share encourages us to keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for being here until the very end. You are the reason we do what we do. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.